You're good?
I'm good. I'm just still laughing at this beginning of no idea what you did.
All right. Well, hey, we're live. So we'll give everybody a second here to check in. But it's raining here. Greg, is it raining where you are?
It is not. It was drizzling a little bit earlier, and it is what is it? 50. I see it's 51 in Grand Rapids. It's actually 60 degrees in Onekama right now.
I guess it feels more like it might traditionally feel in the spring here. So, all right. So we are live. And I think people are starting to tune in, but basically, Greg, we wanted to talk today about something we're seeing more and more of. And it seems like every day we're getting a new one. We're having agents being served lawsuit papers. We're being, they're sending to us as the broker. We're getting calls from the public. We're getting taken to grievance committees across in different MLSs. And the common thing that we're seeing right now is that what's happening is a buyer is getting into a home, they're closing on the home, and then, oh, guess what? A drain gets clogged, or there's a rainy day and water gets into the basement, or they find mold or mildew, or you name any one of the problems, a water heater goes out. You name any single problem you can think of when you are a homeowner. And what's happening is that these buyers are frantically trying to compete to win the offers. They're doing everything they can. They're waiving inspections. They're shortening well and septic inspections, waiving well and septic inspections, whatever they can to compete, right? And then what happens is once they get into the home, these issues arise, and they start going, wait a second, I think someone lied to me. I think I was duped. I think I was misled. I think something fishy took place here. And so we're seeing it look like this. They're not going after the seller of the home anymore. They're pointing at the realtor going, my buyer agent lied to me, or the listing agent lied to me. Somehow the realtors and the brokerage that were involved are now the problem. I'll give you a couple examples without naming any names. We're dealing with one situation where someone helped someone buy a home, and the neighbor doesn't believe that 5-Star or the other company involved explained the property lines properly. And so the neighbor is putting a fence up because the neighbor keeps parking their car partly on the lawn, and it's on the line of the lawn. And so the neighbor's losing their mind, and the neighbor's putting a fence up. And they're suing us, or possibly suing us, to have 5-Star pay for their new fence they're installing. And we're seeing these things time and time again. And we are seeing some where we have right now where we actually have lawyers involved. And it comes down to, even though the seller's disclosure was clear, the purchase agreement was clear, someone waived inspections, they're making the case that their realtor or the 5-Star realtor said too much or represented too much. And so it doesn't matter that the seller maybe did or didn't lie. It doesn't matter that they waived inspections. It doesn't matter that the seller's disclosure statement was filled out by the seller. They're now picking on the realtor and the brokerage as the ones who we should have known they were lying. Are you following what we're seeing more and more of here?
Yeah.
So we're seeing.
Do you want to keep going, or you want me to add something?
Well, basically what we're seeing here is that we're seeing realtors getting into trouble. We're seeing lawyers getting involved. We're seeing buyers and sellers calling up, blaming the realtors and the brokerage for all the problems within the home, even though the realtor shouldn't be representing anything about the home other than what the seller is dictating.
Correct.
So somehow we're either living in a very punitive world where buyers are maybe because there's so much intensity, because they're paying top dollar, because they're waiving all of their rights on the home to get the thing, they're feeling like they want to take somebody down with them.
Yep. So, on that same line, so the first line of defense, guys, is to grab the seller's disclosure statement, have it with you when you show the property. And when they ask a question, say, well, let's go to the seller's disclosure statement. Let's see what the seller has to say. by the way, the reason seller disclosure statements were created was to cut the line of communication between the buyer's agent, the seller's agent, and basically make a straight line from the seller to the buyer to get real estate agents and brokers out of the equation. So agents, I believe, in their, I think, good-heartedness, and by the way, your good-heartedness can be used against you at this moment. So I think what we have to do is encourage all of you to, once again, we have to play it safe in this area. So when you're showing the home, bring that seller's disclosure with you, have them sign it, and basically it's like you're pointing to that for every question they have, because it's all on there.
And then if you need additional questions, you go to the listing agent and you ask for clarification.
And then,
in writing.
so let's give them a couple of examples that we've seen. So
okay, let's start with one where the buyer waived their rights to a survey,
right,
but walked the property with the realtor, and you could see like mow lines, and you could see little bits of areas where you might assume the property line is, right?
yep.
And
So,
sure enough, they accused the realtor of drawing lines on where the property was, even though the seller waived their rights to the survey to win the bid. They still took us to the grievance committee to try and prove that somehow we had misrepresented the size of the lot.
yeah. So again, what I want to say here is that you want to minimize your chatter and stick to the facts. And so what we're seeing right now is if they were ever to ask you a question, should I hire an attorney? Should I get a survey? What's the best survey?
Should I get a staked survey, or should I accept the drawing?
Right. And so where we need to be is at that moment, you have to pretty much, in my humble opinion, you have to bring up the worst case scenario and then leave it to them. But there's another step you can go, and many of the agents are beginning to use it now. We created something a while ago called the Pre-Offer Addendum. It's in .loop. And if you were to go to it right now, it says right here regarding the survey, I'm going to read this quickly, Paul. Okay. Buyer has been advised by their agent. So this is beautiful. And they're going to check, they're going to initial right alongside of that. So they can't come back and later and turn it into a he said, she said. And by the way, I would say 90% of these things are he said, she said, but guess what? The courts and even the associations are probably going to err in the favor of the buyer if there is nothing else in writing that they can look at. So being real estate and being contract driven, the number one key to contracts is that everything must be in writing. So why not then become a professional and protect yourself and us and your client by putting things in writing? And so we've already created this, and it says, buyer has been advised to obtain a boundary survey. That's the most expensive survey. It's the one that gives you the most detail. It talks about easements and obstructions and anything else it can dig up, but it's the maximum survey, but it costs a lot of money. But you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars as a buyer. So come on. And then it says, subject to buyer's review and approval of survey no later than, buyer acknowledges that a boundary survey is the only option which may be considered a full survey. Buyer recognizes that a mortgage survey or sketch may not be a true representation of boundary lines and may not include easements or encroachments which currently exist. And then it says initial here. And so right along with, if you had this with you at the showing and you're going through this, you just say, hey, I just have to verify my broker requires this. It's not asking you to agree to anything other than did I say this or did I
Well, and
not?
this is why it's important, because every time we get into these lawsuits and attorneys get involved, even though there's a checkbox right in the purchase agreement, and again, everyone's purchase agreement is different, but this is an example. There's a checkbox on some of these agreements where someone can physically waive it with a check mark. I waive my inspections, right? Or I waive my survey, right? It's in writing, done. They waived it, boom, and they signed it and initialed it. Attorneys are challenging, going, but did you truly explain to them what that section means? And this is where it turns into he said, she said between the realtor and an agent, a realtor and a client potentially. Because the realtor's like, well, of course I explained the inspections when I read this line here and then we checked that box. But the buyer could be doing, I was under a lot of pressure. You know, I was stressed. I was frantic because we only had 6 hours before we had to put our offer in. And so I was willing to sign anything. My realtor just kind of moved quick, do it really, really quickly, which is why this pre-flight checklist, this pre-addendum checklist, this pre-offer checklist that Greg is referencing right now is so important, because now you have a secondary document where they acknowledge for a second time that they're waiving their survey or they're waiving their inspections. And that's going to be probably a lifesaver if we get into one of those discussions where someone is claiming that even though they did waive it on the purchase agreement and we have it in writing and they've signed it, you can say, but not only that, but I went another step and we reiterated it one more time. So yeah, but we're seeing a lot of this right now, Greg.
So anyway, so then just, kind of like on the overall here, it's like, I was thinking about different ways to present that would maybe give the most impact. And so I'm sitting here and I wrote down the other day, 3 reasons you won't sleep tonight after putting the deal together.
Okay.
And here's where they are. You did not make that one extra call to confirm that one little tiny little issue that was just hanging out there to the side. And you maybe thought you were tired or you had other plans or whatever, but it would have just taken a minute. And now you're laying in bed and you didn't do it. And the next day it blows up. You knew the client wasn't understanding clearly, and you decided to just let it ride instead of saying, you know what, let me come back and try to explain that a little bit better. I could tell from the look on your face, or I could tell by the way you responded on the phone or on an email or a text, whatever, but I could just sense that there was still some confusion. I want to make this crystal clear to you so that you really totally understand this, and you don't have to guess. And, or you just convinced yourself it wasn't a big deal. And you know what? Anytime somebody is spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, every little tiny little thing can end up being a big deal.
When they find one problem with the house that they think was maybe wrong, or that maybe the seller did hide something, and their mind starts going into the worst case scenario. Now their spidey senses are up and they're looking for every single thing in the house, and it becomes a laundry list of things that were hidden from them. And so it's.
So here's another area that I'd like to go into. And this one is, you've sold the property, you're getting ready to close. And today we've got numerous title companies all doing different things. And what concerns us is that agents will have a situation where something was omitted on the closing statement. And so it closes, and now there's a problem where we need to go back and collect money or whatever, or something should have been collected from the buyer or the seller and it wasn't. And as a real estate agent, I want to make clear that ultimately, if you point to the title company and say they screwed up, well, I don't know, that kind of leaves you hanging there and looking like you're a victim. And I never wanted to be a victim. And so, I would always verify everything from the commissions to make sure the prorations were done properly. But it appears is that a lot of agents today are 100% relying that the title company is going to be correct every time. And I'm here to tell you, it's not true. It's not 100%. Mistakes are made. They're human beings. And I believe it's the agent's responsibility to verify. And so I've written another little paper, the top 5 things that can go wrong at a closing. Miscommunications. Huge. Why, after all the work that you've done over the previous 3 months or 6 months or whatever has been, to finish with a whimper instead of a celebration, and or backtracking or trying to fix something after the fact. It's like, you don't have to go through this if you just take the time and have some oversight, timely review.
A couple of examples, Greg, that we see, right? What would be some examples that we see?
Man,
I think verifying the appliances were left behind.
Right.
How many washer and dryers have you purchased?
If you're concerned about a load of trash that could fill up a 30-yard dumpster, did you call and verify that, a couple days before? Is it done? Do you have a receipt?
Verifying possession. If they're verifying possession, verifying, like, for example, let's say you negotiated there's going to be a rental fee for possession beyond closing date. When will they be paying that rent? Is that rent going directly to your seller? Is it coming at the closing table? Should you be collecting it? Because we're seeing, or let's say you're selling a rental property. How about verifying where in the world the security deposits are for the new owner, for the new landlord? Is that going to be passed off to the new landlord at closing?
Because the buyer will end up being responsible for that, whether they received it or not from the seller.
That buyer just bought those contracts. And so if you represent an investor who's buying a rental property and you're not seeing how that security deposit's being negotiated and that seller plans on keeping it, well, I can bet you that your buyer is going to call you and ask you for the security deposits.
Something else, Paul, that we see more regular than you would like to think it could possibly happen. The listing agent checks the box that there's public sewer. And then you get to after the closing, the buyers they have a problem. Somebody comes out. This just happened recently, by the way. This is not just making stuff up here.
Right.
Turns out they weren't hooked up to sewer.
Yeah.
Well, what are you going to do? Well, it's after the fact. The only option probably now is to call up the seller and sue them. On the other hand, if you're representing the buyer, do you have a responsibility to verify that there's sewer? And it'd be really simple. You know how? Ask the seller to provide a copy of the water and sewer bill that they get quarterly, and to prove that they're actually paying a sewer bill. That would have been so simple in one of these cases that we just had.
Yep.
Another thing is unexpected events. Like, did you check with a title company and verify that they have everything, that all the checks are going to be there? There's not going to be any unexpected documents at the closing that somebody has slipped in there. But you know what? So agents, review the numbers the day prior to a close. Verify that any verbal negotiations have been reduced to writing. We've seen this recently where 2 agents were somehow, they got into a conversation about the seller fixing some things, and they got to the closing. There was nothing in writing. The buyer's, I guess, agent was trusting that the sellers were going to do it. But you know what? Your responsibility is to your buyers at this moment to put everything in writing, and don't go to a closing and trusting that the seller is going to do something after the fact. That's a recipe for disaster.
One of the super common things we see too is water in the basement.
Yep.
So they move in, sure enough, there's a rainstorm, and sure enough, water's in the basement. And oh, guess what? The seller's disclosure statement says no water in the basement. Yep. You waived your inspections, and maybe your realtor was down there with you. You guys were walking around, sniffing around. You smell no mildew, you smell no mold, you see no evidence of water, but that buyer is convinced that someone lied, right? Because hey, man, first sign of rain, water in the basement. Someone's covering something up, and it's tough because at that moment, you're put in a really tough spot because your client's calling you saying, "Hey, I want to go after somebody. Like somebody owes me something, right? I've been wronged." But we know how hard it is to prove that someone lied on a seller's disclosure statement, right? That's very difficult to prove. It can be proven, but it's very difficult to do, to prove it. So it's a tough spot.
So here's just a few words, things that that I put down that an agent should never say, never do, and always verify. Never say, "I promise you." Never say, "I guarantee you." Never say never. Never say anything that could be perceived as threatening when you're talking to your client. Find a way to word it that does not come across as, wow, this could cost you, you could get sued. The seller will sue you if you try to get out of it. I've always had a philosophy that if I'm working for the buyer and they want to get out of a transaction, my job is to help them get out of the transaction. Never insinuate in any way, shape, or form that they shouldn't get inspections. Never comment on roofs or basements in terms of whether they're waterproof or if it's ever leaked. Put the offer addendum in front of them. Appraisal and inspection waivers. If it were me and they're going to waive inspections or appraisals, appraisal gap or whatever, I'd probably have them sign something that said, "I did not advise you to do this." We've got one right now where it's a lawsuit where the agent tried to persuade the buyer not to buy it. They further tried to get them to do inspections and other things. They waived that. Then they get in, they've got a problem, and now they're suing. And, the agent thought they were friends. They thought we had this great relationship. Oh, they'll never sue me. You don't know who will do that and who won't.
Right.
If they're going to write an offer, I don't think I'd ever use the words like, "Well, they'll never accept that," or "They won't accept, I'm sure they won't accept that." Well, you don't know. So why would you use words such as that? Sometimes it's appropriate to ask them if they want your 2 cents on an issue.
Yeah.
Do you want me to speak to this, or are we good?
I think, yeah.
So anyway, I think, Paul, that we've kind of beat this horse here a little bit, but
Right.
that I think that, the thing is that you as the agent are ultimately responsible for everything. And you're responsible for what you say. You're responsible for what you don't say. You're responsible for what you put in writing or what you don't put in writing. You're responsible for your great follow-up. And, every one of these events that we're talking about will probably be the end of a relationship where you just worked your tail off to build a relationship. And now you've got nothing. You maybe are going to get paid that commission on that deal, but that's it. And to me, that's the worst way to look at this. To me, the only way to look at this is that there are anywhere from 4 to 10 sales underneath this. If I do the right thing, I make it happen perfectly. I dot all the I's, cross all the T's, multiple phone calls over the top, verifications, leaving nothing to chance or any situation where I'm going to have to look at another person and say, "You know what, you did it to me this time, but it's never going to happen again." And so take responsibility, take the time, do the work. and enjoy the fruits of what the top agents enjoy, which is, 80 to 90% referral business 5 years down the road.
Yep. Yep.
So that's all I got.
All right, so be careful what you say, only disclose what you're allowed to disclose, right? You don't make representations you can't back up, and disclose. Yep.
Absolutely. I think that's all I've got, Paul.
All right, well, I hope you guys walked away with a couple things here today, maybe just one, but just, we're seeing a lot more of this, so dot your I's, cross your T's. If you're gonna waive inspections, you're gonna waive surveys, get that pre-offer addendum checklist signed. It's gonna save you in the long run. And yep. All right, guys, have a great week.
All right, see y'all.
See ya.